Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We have a little different show for you today as we take a rare detour from politics. I should say directly politics, because politics impacts all of our lives, including housing supply, affordable housing, and public housing. And there is a dearth of it in Pennsylvania. It means not enough. It's a problem we have all over the country, really. And to today's show, we welcome two experts to talk about the issues. The first is Robin Wiseman, who is the director and CEO of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as the PHFA. We also have Barbara Wilson, who is the executive director of the Lancaster City Housing Authority, as well as she was recently elected as president of the Pennsylvania Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies in Pennsylvania. That's known as PARA. We'll begin with the credentials and some background on Robin Wiseman so you get to know her. In her role as CEO of the PHFA, she manages operations and initiatives that promote development of affordable rental housing, as well as providing financing for home ownership. She has held high public office, serving as the treasurer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and she was appointed as the Secretary of Banking and Securities during the Wolfe administration. In addition, Robin led the first woman-owned investment banking firm on Wall Street. She has held positions at Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch and has served on the board of municipal securities under the SEC, otherwise known as the Securities and Exchange Commission. She has also served on the advisory council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's Economic and Community Council. Educationally, Robin graduated from Lafayette College and received her Juris Doctorate degree from Rutgers Law School, where she also received the Distinguished Alumni Award. Also appearing today, as I mentioned, is Barbara Wilson, recently elected president of the Pennsylvania Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies, as well as serving as the executive director of Lancaster City Housing Authority. PARA represents all of the public housing and redevelopment authorities in Pennsylvania, which provides public housing for our most needy citizens. PARA oversees billions of housing projects and provides housing for 250,000 people in Pennsylvania. Barb earned a degree in political science from the University of Scranton, and she received her master's degree in urban affairs and public policy from the University of Delaware. She has also held elective office, serving on Lancaster City Council. Among her many achievements, she has led an organization that became the Partners for Purpose, a nonprofit organization designed to address critical housing needs. Under her leadership, that organization repositioned 96 scattered sites from public housing to housing choice vouchers, a pivotal move that enabled Partners with Purpose to secure a new funding source to revitalize previously uninhabitable homes. We could think of no better two guests than to talk about the issues we face in Pennsylvania on something that's very important. As much as we talk about economic development and bring you the politicians that help generate it, we need housing for people once they get here. So we'll be covering those subjects on today's show.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Welcome to this week's Volpe Report, and I have two special guests to talk about an issue that, very honestly, I'll be learning about with you. I know of the issue in a general way, and I know you all know that affordable housing is one of the main issues our country faces right now. It's particularly important in Pennsylvania, and we have two people here. To my immediate right, Robin Wiseman, who is the president of the board of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, otherwise known as the PHFA, which I'm sure many of you have heard. And to her right is a dear friend of mine and currently the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies, Barb Wilson. Barb is from Lancaster, and Robin, you are from?
Bucks County.
Bucks County, the southeast part of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Well, just to set the table first before we actually start the interview, again, affordable housing is an important issue. I was sharing with these folks that I had just left a business roundtable with United States Senator Dave McCormick, United States Congressman Dan Muser, United States Congressman Rob Bresnahan, Pennsylvania Auditor General Tim DeFore, and Pennsylvania Senator Lisa Baker. And at that hour and a half roundtable, I myself was a little surprised to learn that the issue of affordable housing was one of the main topics of conversation, including from the president of Scranton's Chamber of Commerce, my friend Bob Durkin. So this is timely because it's an issue we all face. And now I'm going to turn to you first, Robin. As we had talked before we started filming, I have a little idea, thanks to my good friend Eddie Cristiano, who sits on your board, what the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency does. I'm going to expect that probably somewhere 90% of our audience has no idea. So let's start with the simple stuff. Explain to them your role in the PHFA and what role it plays in Pennsylvania's housing market.
Thank you so much, and delighted to be here today, particularly on a day where all of these issues have come to light for you. PHFA is a 50-year-old organization. It was created by the state legislature in 1972, so we're actually a little bit older than 50 now. It's an instrumentality of the Commonwealth with an independent board, and our sole mission is to provide for access to affordable rental housing and affordable home ownership. So those are the two core lines of business. There are so many things, as you know, in housing. It's a complex subject. It's a complex business. It's a capital-intensive industry. So we work all of the different aspects, whether it's counseling, financial education, supportive services for people with disabilities. We incorporate those all into our programs. We have two primary lines of business, as I mentioned just before. One is single-family home ownership. We have a very large portfolio of single-family mortgages that we access and we provide for around the entire Commonwealth with 96 lenders who deliver loans that qualify for first-time home buyers, who who have moderate incomes, but still want the privilege and the pleasure of owning their own home. That's the first line of business. The second line of business is to provide and accelerate and develop multifamily housing, which is affordable enough for people to pay the rent that it requires every month. As you know, we have various classes of housing. Everybody wants to live in quality housing, but quality housing is very expensive. Up front, it's very capital intensive. So our goal is to get as many resources together for the multifamily housing, get as much paid for up front so that the amount that has to get paid over time, much like a single family mortgage, so the amount that gets paid over time is something people of moderate income can afford. And that's the secret sauce to being able to afford to pay rent.
Well, that's a great explanation and understandable, which segues nicely over to you, Barb. Public housing, I have a little more knowledge about than what the PHFA does and what moderate income folks are looking to do. Public housing is for the lower income that cannot afford moderate housing or rents. Section 8 program is something I'll have you explain as well. But talk about your core issues and what you do in public housing and the type of people you're trying to provide housing for.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show this afternoon. I really appreciate it to talk about this very important subject, which is affordable housing. So in public housing, our issues are that what I always like to tell people when I talk about are the folks that we house. These are a lot of times are the working poor. So in our family developments, these are people who work most and have 2 or 3 jobs in menial jobs that don't pay that pay minimum wage or less. And then for our high rises with our seniors and our folks with disabilities, those are folks who did work at one time, but their only form of income right now is their Social Security. And as we all know, that's not enough to rent in the private sector. So those are the people that we house. The Lancaster City Housing Authority it was established in 1949. So our buildings are pretty old. So we have major infrastructure improvements that we need to deal with. We have, so that's major maintenance, day-to-day maintenance, but we also want to offer programs that help our residents to be able to empower them in life. So for our seniors, it's how do we keep you healthy and whole? For our working families, how do we empower you to be able to get educational opportunities, job skill sets, so that then you can move on to home ownership or out of public housing, so we can bring other folks in and give them foundation. So I always look at it, this is a foundational piece. This shouldn't be the end of the road for you when it comes to housing, but everybody needs that basic fundamental start, and that's what we provide. And we need help in not only from the federal government, which we receive the bulk of our subsidies from, but also state and locally, to be able to do the work that we need to do to house in Lancaster City over 3,000 people when it comes to our public housing program and our Section 8 programs.
We're going to talk about that component in a second. Back to you, Robin. Now, if you're watching the show, and I'm happy to tell you a lot of people do, how would they go about starting this? Who would they call? Who would they go see to possibly qualify?
Well, in our electronically connected society today, the first place to go is to our website, to PHFA, which is phfa.org, but it's www. And under that, we have a drop down for home ownership. But one of the things so that's the best start. There's 800 numbers. There are a variety of ways to reach us, but you can see all of that on the website. But the really interesting thing one of the interesting things that we do is we call our single family home ownership program, which can provide down payment and closing cost assistance, which we all know is the single largest barrier to home ownership. We actually provide loans that provide that are built into the loan. So it's really, really user-friendly. But we call it lending with the heart, in the sense that we are with you from the beginning through counseling or financial education to getting your loans. If there's difficulty with your loan at some point, we help with foreclosure prevention and actually a lending program to help you if you have difficulties with your mortgage, and right through the end. And we have a real person on the line. We have a hotline at the agency. So you can call up and talk to a person and work through your issues. So we have a very, very low delinquency rate because of that, because we're actually really working in partnership with the individuals who are taking advantage of the loans.
Great. Believe it or not, as our staff has told you how fast this half hour would blow through, we're halfway through. It's time for our break before I come back to you, Barb. So we're again here today with Robin Wiseman, head of the PHFA board, and Barb Wilson, who is the head of the State Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies, beside what she does in Lancaster. And we'll be right back after this message.
There are more places you can watch the Volpe Report, your premier political talk show. Tune in to Fox 56 every Sunday morning at 10:30 as we bring prominent national and state officials right into your living room. Or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report, where you get full access to all of our episodes, wherever you are. Our guests are the newsmakers, the decision makers, the people who shape the policies that affect us all. We dive deep into what matters most to Pennsylvanians with in-depth interviews that give you the full picture. We're dedicated to providing you with unfiltered, thought-provoking conversations. Whether it's local policy, national politics, or everything in between, we're right here to break it down and keep you informed. So wherever you want to watch, the Volpe Report is always here for you, delivering everything you need to know in today's political landscape.
Welcome back to the Volpe Report. Again, we're here with the head of the PHFA board, Robin Wiseman, as well as Barb Wilson, the head of the Pennsylvania State Association of Housing Redevelopment Agencies. So Barb, your turn now. I'm aware, obviously, even though housing isn't my main domain, we insure most of Pennsylvania's housing authorities and have for 40 years. So I've learned through the awful grace of God, some of what goes on in public housing. One of the things I learned is that in the good old days, back in like the time of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, well into the 1980s, public housing was a check you would get from Congress. It would come through city and county housing authorities. You mentioned City of Lancaster. There's County of Lancaster. There are cities in county, Scranton and Lackawanna County, all have separate agencies. They are formed under state law. The Housing Act of 1937 allows them to form and incorporate, so they're actually state agencies. So what the federal government has done, and I look at, they just flipped the entire paradigm backwards, is that instead of them up front giving you a check, which is taxpayer money, of course, they have now reversed that. They don't give you the money up front. They encourage you to get into these programs that they have created. They have amended the Internal Revenue Code and the tax code to allow for things called tax credit programs, for example, which effectively, they don't give you the money up front, but you, in partnership with private developers and private companies and banks, conglomerate that. What would be the incentive for private developers to risk an investment and put up the money? Because the federal government gives them a tax credit for that money up at the back end. So what the federal government is doing is they're incentivizing the private sector to participate in affordable public housing and I don't mean a deduction, I mean a credit. They literally write it right off their tax bill. So talk a little bit about what you've experienced with that as some backdrop and how it's going.
So there are over 200 members within the para agencies across the state. And the sizes of those entities range from Philadelphia size to Pittsburgh, and everything in between in the state. Lancaster is what we call a middle-sized housing authority. So for some of the bigger agencies who have thought ahead and have collectively diversified their portfolios and brought in other ways to be able to provide affordable housing, that's great. So they're doing those housing tax credits, and they understand that, they've been doing that, and it's working for them. For housing authorities in my age, my size, which is median size, we actually haven't embarked in that yet. What we have done, however, is taken advantage of another program through the Housing Urban Development called Section 18, which is we repositioned 95 of our single-family homes, and we started a nonprofit called Partners with Purpose. By doing that, we were able to downsize our portfolio, take those 95 single-family homes, and we're able to now go after different funding streams that, as a housing authority, we federally were not eligible to do. So that's enabled us to separate those 95 single-family homes. We now can go after state funding, CDBG funds, home funds. We've gotten funding that way to bring houses for families within the city of Lancaster that were once inhabitable, and now we've totally rehabbed them. So that's one of the areas that we're doing. We're also looking into, with our nonprofit, to be able to go after other funding streams than to help the housing authority. Housing tax credits is something new for us. I started as the executive director 7 years ago. And like I said, our only funding source was through HUD. And as you know, that funding has been diminished. And so we are faced with having to be creative. And we are being told now we can be creative, because back in the days when, like you said, there was just a blank check, you didn't have to do anything else. But now we've been giving the leeway to be creative and go out and find other ways to fund our housing. And that's what we're doing. Part of me, I like it, it's creative, it's learning, and it's another way to create additional housing, but also preserve the housing that we do have.
Right. Well, yeah, because I know, again, back to what I do know about it, you used to get a lot of modernization money from the federal government. Not getting so much of that anymore either.
Yeah, I heard about those dollars.
Yeah, you heard it. It's a rumor. Well, again, I swear we've rehearsed, because now we segue back, about an issue that we were just talking about as far as multifamily issues. And I had said earlier in the program, Robin, that we'll say for the latter part of the program, which we're already at, some of the problems, issues you face going forward, and attracting banks, getting loans, sponsored by them, incentives to create multifamily. As Barb left off with multifamily, you were talking about single family earlier. Now let's talk about multifamily and some of the difficulties in getting these projects done, so people know what the issues are.
Yes, well, it's certainly complex. I think that's the overarching theme, that it's a lot of composite pieces that make up the puzzle to hold together any particular financing. There are a lot of different needs, whether you're financing because you want to house seniors or some people with disabilities or families. We take, by the way, what developers and communities are interested in. They submit it to us. We do not tell them what to do. We respond to the market. So developers are creative, along with either housing authorities or communities or municipalities, at coming up with the idea for what the need is, whether or not it will be a viable and long-term sustaining residence if it's multifamily, and how we'll get there to pay for it, whether it's with the local commercial bank for the construction loan, the tax credit investors that you mentioned, who get tax credit once a year for 10 years once the property is placed into service. So the complexity, I think, is the biggest challenge, and getting everything to work together. It is a journey. It's a journey, but it can be a well effectuated one, and it is a real partnership. Again, I can't emphasize enough how much it's a private-public partnership. And the good news about housing today is that we all know, and everyone knows, it's such an economic driver. It's really how we're going to revitalize our communities across the Commonwealth. So everybody is rowing in there, everybody is in the same direction. We just have to make sure we all row in the same direction together. And that's the devil in the details, but that's why we're very focused on effective administration and trying to deliver it as effectively and as efficiently as possible. If I may, I just want to, after properties have been in, and you can ask, as Barb mentioned, preservation is key. And we have some of the oldest housing stock in the country.
I know.
Both, I guess you know that. We all know that. Yes, you do know that.
We insure all those properties.
Right. And, whether it's multifamily or single family. It all needs repair and maintenance.
That's true.
And that's something I think, and I am confident that our Commonwealth will address it at some point. But our agency is also very focused on the quality of living after it's put into service. And the challenge here is these are lean budgets. These are lean operating budgets. This isn't the premium homeowners associations, nobody likes paying them either when they're in luxury. You can imagine how challenging it is for these affordable housing units. But we are very focused on making sure that the managers are doing the work they need to do. So compliance is an issue. But I think we need supply, both single and multifamily, and we also need preservation. Those are the three pieces that are critical to housing in the Commonwealth.
That's well said, Robin. Back to you, Barb, as we, believe it or not, again, running out of time. What are the issues you see? We have a new administration in Washington, Republican control of Senate and the House, and we have a new president in the White House. Obviously, as we're all aware, there are major cuts going on. One of the subject matters of today's meeting, by the way, the roundtable, was some of the cuts that were going to happen at HUD. What do you believe your issues and your concerns are, and things you think need to be addressed relative to the housing in Pennsylvania?
Well, throughout the Commonwealth, we house Republicans, Democrats, Independents,
should be everyone. A bipartisan issue.
And so this is a bipartisan issue. I was saying earlier during our conversation with Robin that, I came into this and I'm here to advocate for the people we house. And so for those who can't advocate for themselves. And so for me, no matter who's in office, platforms like this, thank you so much for having me today, because this is how we get the word out to new people coming into these positions in Washington, to know how important housing is, and especially on this level. In addition to us providing housing, we also booster the economies locally for and throughout wherever our housing authorities are located. We put a lot into the economy. So in addition to housing people, we have to purchase goods and services, all the construction. When monies do come through, as most people know, if you're in public housing arena or redevelopment, you get $1.90, $2, you have to account for $1.98 of that. So we're the most regulated. We make sure we're very fiscally responsible. And so, like you said, we have all this aging infrastructure. Our buildings, I think the newest one is 1972. So we are in need of what I did like about the last administration, the last two administrations, is that they started letting us be creative, and they start coming with creative dollars. And so instead of just, here's your capital fund, here's your operating fund, here are certain grants that we are funding based on need, and we applied for. And so for the Housing Authority of Lancaster, with $9 million that we've acquired in the last couple of years, that I hope we'll be able to do some major improvements that will give folks a brand new HVAC systems, energy efficiency. So, even that, to the climate, but coming to the table, talking with us. And so I appreciate your show. I appreciate having the opportunity to be able to talk to the new senator for the state, Senator McCormick. That's what needs to take place. And so I appreciate that.
One thing I heard at this roundtable, back to that for a second, is that, and this is where affordable housing kept becoming a part of the conversation, was that they have all these wonderful plans. Rob Bresnahan sits on the infrastructure committee and highways committee in the federal government. And he's talking about all these wonderful infrastructure projects. And Dan Muser and Dave McCormick were also talking about, what the emphasis in the Trump administration on energy, that he's going to untap our natural gas in Pennsylvania. And they're talking about these $18 billion projects, $20 billion projects in Pennsylvania, all the jobs that's going to create, which gets you back to, these people need a place to live. Absolutely. They're going to come in from other states. We're going to have a booming economy. Well, they can't pitch tents out in the fields of Pennsylvania. So at any rate, again, I want to thank both of you for your time and your expertise, and a humble thank you for educating me. I take a while. I'm picking it up. I think our audience did as well. So thank you for your time. And again, we're here today with Robin Wiseman, the head of the PHFA Board of Directors, and Barb Wilson, who is the head of the Pennsylvania Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies, which is only her part-time job, because her full-time job is at the City of Lancaster Housing Authority, one of our larger housing authorities in Pennsylvania. So you've had two experts on housing. Of course, I know I've said before, we are going to be putting up on the screen in this show, and have been, some contact information. And I think you'll find it beneficial. It's been a wonderful learning experience for me. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.